North Korea has recently threatened that it will turn the US's rash, arrogant aircraft carriers into a lump of scrap metal. But can they? There are only two realistic ways in which North Korea would be able to destroy a US aircraft carrier. The first would be to use torpedoes. The North Korean Navy does operate about 40 to 60 submarines. Most of these submarines are, however, extremely old, first built a half century ago. The more dangerous among these would be the Sang-o, Yeono, and the new Sinpo class boats. These subs are slow and relatively noisy, meaning that they're much easier to detect compared to modern US and Russian boats. The US Navy also benefits from having over 100 years of ASW, or anti-submarine warfare, experience. Most US ships carry MH-60 helicopters that will patrol the waters around the ship. These are armed with sonobuoys, which will be dropped to listen for enemy submarines, and air-launched torpedoes to attack once detected. Some ships are also armed with RUM-139 ASROC missiles, which are basically just torpedoes placed on top of a rocket to extend its range. For North Korea to stand a chance to get past these defenses and get close enough to fire on the carrier, they would have to attack with more than a dozen submarines. At that point, it would just be a matter if the US could detect and sink all the subs before one gets through, but odds are the US Navy would be able to detect all these submarines long before they even got near the carrier. At which point, because these submarines are much slower than US ships, the US vessels could easily get away. The second option for the North Koreans to attack a carrier would be with missiles. The main weapon to do this with are anti-ship missiles. Now, North Korea does have several anti-ship missiles in its arsenal. For example, they are known to have the KH-28, a short-ranged but very fast missile, the Chinese C-602 and the Chinese C-802, slightly longer range but subsonic, the Russian Silkworm with a range of 75 to 150 miles and also subsonic, and the much newer KH-35. That's a subsonic missile with a range of about 150 miles. All of these missiles except for the KH-35 are relatively old and vulnerable to decoys and jamming. And while the exact figures are unknown, it is reasonable to assume that North Korea has a very small number of each one of these types. A US carrier would be hundreds of miles off the coast of North Korea, meaning that they would have to get much closer to the carrier so that they can fire. North Korea has very few options to deliver these missiles. With only a few ships able to fire anti-ship missiles, namely the 2 Najin and possibly the 3 Soho and Nampo class frigates, and maybe about a dozen smaller missile boats like the Osa class. Although these ships would most likely be destroyed before they got within firing range. It is possible that North Korea could get lucky in a surprise attack and getting close enough. In this case, they would need to fire as many missiles as possible. The US has developed and deployed some of the most advanced missile defense systems in the world, designed exactly for this purpose, to shoot down incoming anti-ship missiles. The US Navy has trained and prepared its forces to defend against such missile attacks for decades during the Cold War. The North Korean anti-ship missiles would then have to get through a barrage of SM-6, SM-2, ESSM, RIM-116, and phalanx fire from the carrier and its escort ships. After all this, if a few survive, US Navy ships are built to be able to take major damage and still stay afloat. Nimitz carriers have hulls made up of extremely strong steel plates, measuring several inches thick. Such an attack could put the carrier out of operation until it was repaired, but would most likely not sink it. And North Korea's ballistic missiles are not designed to hit moving targets like an aircraft carrier. While China has recently deployed the first anti-ship ballistic missiles, North Korea is not known to possess such a weapon. If they launch a ballistic missile armed with a nuclear warhead, it is possible that they would damage a ship. However, North Korea's nuclear bombs are still relatively weak. Its most powerful warhead would only actually destroy ships within about a half-kilometer radius. And with the aircraft carrier moving and the large CEP, or circular air probability, of their ballistic missiles, odds are it would not detonate close enough to the ship. And this is assuming that North Korea even has nuclear warheads small enough to fit on ballistic missiles. And finally, North Korea would have a very difficult time even locating a US carrier at sea in the first place. They do not have any dedicated maritime reconnaissance aircraft, any recon satellites, etc. So North Korea could theoretically sink or at least damage a US aircraft carrier if they were extremely lucky in a surprise attack. Although to do this, they would have to throw almost everything they have just to have that slim chance. Chances of success are almost nothing. This is just one more practically baseless threats in a torrent of rhetoric coming out of the DPRK.